The Book of Psalms has been the place where generations of people have turned to worship their God. It's a place where they come to share their joy or to express their pain. It's the hymn book of the Bible. It's also the prayer book of the Bible. It's a companion to the ups and downs of our human existence. We read it to connect our experiences in the here and now to the eternal, everlasting God. But the Book of Psalms takes us beyond our immediate situation and our immediate needs. You see, reading the Psalms connects us to the wider church. The Book of Psalms was the core of the prayer book that was used by Jesus and the disciples. Jesus himself would have learnt and repeated these words in the family, in the synagogue, in the temple. And as we read for the Gospels, we hear him quote them and apply them to his life and teachings. The early church took the Psalms and they applied them and let them shape their worship and their community. Generations of Christians have prayed the Psalms. So reading the Psalms from our living rooms, our dining rooms, maybe even our bedrooms at the moment, connects us to the roots of our faith and to a global community. So today, I'd like us to look at a psalm together. I'd like us to look at a psalm and ask, what message did it have for the psalmist? Then I'd like us to ask, what message does it have for us today in our own individual situation? And I'd like us to then connect it to the wider church and community and the way they use it to worship God. The Psalms are poems, and with any poetry there's a breadth of language that is often hard to capture in a single translation. So today I'm doing something slightly different for this video. I'm going to record some different translations so that you can hear this psalm maybe in a slightly new way, and it'll help us to hear what God is trying to tell us when we hear something slightly different. So I'm going to look at 6 different translations today, and I'll put them throughout this little video. The King James Version is probably the version of the Bible that most of us grew up with, and particularly when it comes to the words of the Psalms, they'll be the ones that we're most familiar with. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in, from this time forth and even for evermore. This psalm is slightly different to the other psalms that we read in the Book of Psalms. It's not a prayer. A lot of the psalms are prayers to God. This one doesn't even address God. It's got a slightly different structure too. You'll have noticed as you heard us read the psalm there that the psalmist asks a question, then the psalmist answers the question, and then another voice speaks both about the psalmist and about God. So it's a little bit different. Actually, the psalm is different for another reason. If you notice at the beginning of some of your Bibles, if you followed along, it called it a psalm of ascent or a song of ascent. Now there are 15 psalms in the Book of Psalms of this description. And the best understanding that we have of this is that these were pilgrim songs. These were psalms that you would sing or say or repeat as part of your pilgrimage to Jerusalem. There were 3 annual festivals and people travelled to Jerusalem. And so as they went up to Jerusalem, they would use these pilgrim psalms. So that's why in this psalm we hear the dangers that pilgrims would face on their travels. So as a pilgrim psalm, it talks about the difficulties and dangers we have now, but it also asks about the questions about the larger issues in our life. Ever since I was at college, the New Revised Standard Version has been my go-to version. I use it for studying, I use it for preparation. It's quite a nice, more formal translation. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore. Where do you look for help? Well, if I think about it, the place I look for help most often is probably the rearview mirror. I can remember a couple of times. Once when I had a problem with a puncture and the tyre just wouldn't come off and the tools weren't working. So I was looking in the rearview mirror to see my friend arrive with an extra set of tools. Sometimes I remember waiting for the AA, waiting to see the yellow lights in the mirror behind me. Actually, most of us today, where do we look for help? We look at our phones probably, don't we? That's where we have all the answers to life and all the questions we struggle with. But let's have a look at the psalmist here, and this is where straight away we get into an issue of translation. The King James says, I will lift up my eyes to the hills, whence cometh my help. In other words, the King James is saying, we look to the hills, that's where my help is coming from. But most modern translations, and to be honest I think they're probably right here, talk about looking to the hills, asking where is my help going to come from. It's, I look to the hills, where is my help going to come from? Not where is it from, but just generally, where is this help that I need? Where is it going to be? So why does the psalmist look at the hills? Well, quite simply, this is probably where danger comes from. In the story of the Good Samaritan, they go in the opposite way from Jerusalem down, and they go through mountainous regions. That's where the bandits are. The psalmist is doing the opposite, he's going up to Jerusalem. But still, it's difficult, dangerous country. Also, the hills, well, this is where the pagan gods were believed to live. You remember the stories in the Old Testament of the Baals? These are the gods of the high places, and the Asherah of poles. So this is a place where, maybe people look for pagan help, or where they were worried about the pagans. But I think the real reason the psalmist looks to the hills is going back to the purpose of his psalm, a psalm of ascent, a pilgrimage psalm. As he goes up the road towards Jerusalem, he sees the town of Jerusalem, and around it some low-lying hills, and the hills look like they're protecting the city. And so the psalmist sees Jerusalem protected by these hills, and he thinks, what about me? Who's going to protect me? Who is going to protect me? Who is going to protect you? When I study the Old Testament, I like to have a look at a Jewish translation, and my go-to is the New Jewish Publication Society's version. I turn my eyes to the mountain. From where will help come? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. See, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The Lord is your guardian. The Lord is your protection at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all harm. He will guard your life. The Lord will guard your going and your coming, now and forevermore. The psalmist answers his own question in verse 2. Who is going to protect him? Where's his help going to come from? From the Creator God. The God who made the mountains which protect the city of Jerusalem will protect him. Generations of Christians have repeated, as they say the words of the Creed, Maker of heaven and earth. But it's even earlier than this. You go back to the story of Abraham, when he meets the priest King Melchizedek. He blesses him in the name of the Maker of heaven and earth. When Hezekiah is worried and he cries out to God to help during the Assyrian attack, when Jeremiah calls out to God during the Babylonian siege, they call out to the Maker of heaven and earth. It identifies the Lord as the one whose power to help and whose blessing is unlimited by anything that is. It points towards the Maker rather than what is made. It's another way of saying Almighty. The sovereign God can be depended upon for help and blessing. If these hills protect the city of Jerusalem, then the Maker of those hills is a far more important and strong protector of you and me. When I want a simple translation, a more modern one, my go-to is the Contemporary English version. It's the one I'll just pick up if I want to read something simple. I look to the hills. Where will I find help? It will come from the Lord, who created the heavens and the earth. The Lord is your protector, and he won't go to sleep or let you stumble. The protector of Israel doesn't doze or ever get drowsy. The Lord is your protector, there at your right side to shade you from the sun. You won't be harmed by the sun during the day or by the moon at night. The Lord will protect you and keep you safe from all dangers. The Lord will protect you now and always, wherever you go. I used to walk in the Scottish Highlands, so I know what it means to keep your feet on even ground. I've walked over some rough paths, I've walked over some broken surfaces, and I've even balanced on knife edge arêtes. But more than this, I also used to climb. I know what it's like to have your foot slip off of a rock. I know what it's like to have a climbing hold spin and make you fall off the wall. And I know what it's like to have a crampon, to have a point just blow out of the ice. So that is why this is one of my favourite symbols in all of the Psalms. The idea that there's a God who won't let you fall or your feet stumble. To let your foot stumble is an idiom in the Psalms for getting into trouble. When you stumble, at best you lose your balance, at worst you fall, and if we're thinking about a pilgrim here, if you injure yourself out in the wilds, far away from medical attention, it becomes very serious. So the idea of a God who stops your foot from slipping is just a wonderful personal comfort to me, and I hope you've experienced that too. Who doesn't sleep? Well, during the war, they gave amphetamines to soldiers and pilots to try and keep them alert and from sleeping. They thought they could fit in a few extra hours of flying or fighting. It didn't work well long term. We all need to sleep. Just talk to new parents who are struggling to try and find time for sleep. You soon learn that sleep deprivation leads to all sorts of troubles. But here in this psalm, sleep leads to something more serious. You see, sleeping, nighttime, is a dangerous time for the psalmist, for this is when bandits and enemies might attack him when he's on the pilgrim route. The psalmist, on his journey to Jerusalem, needs to sleep. But God doesn't. When the psalmist is asleep in a camp by the roadside, God is still standing watching over him. God is a guardian. God is a protector. You may remember the story when Elijah is confronting the prophets of Baal, and he screams and shouts to them and says, "Shout, make your noise louder. Maybe your God is asleep." That's something the psalmist doesn't have to worry about. It's something you don't have to worry about. It's something I don't have to worry about. Our God doesn't sleep or slumber. The psalmist also talked about some of the other dangers. He talks about sunstroke and heat stroke. Now these were an ever-present danger. We probably don't have that problem out here, even though this is the warmest day of the year so far. I don't see many people with heat stroke. But it was a danger to the Palestinian pilgrim. You could die from it. But even this, the maker of the sun, could protect the psalmist from. Now you might be reading this psalm and wonder why you need protection from the moon. Well, it's not, as some have suggested, the fact that the moonlight might show your camp to enemies and bandits, they could attack you. No, it's simply this. It's the danger of being moonstruck. There was an idea that the moon could turn you mad. Now we know it doesn't work like that, but this is the fear for the psalmist. But his God says, you will be protected from the sunlight and the moonlight. He has nothing to worry about, even imagined threats. A psalter is a collection of psalms used in worship, so they're often translated for how they sound when they're spoken. And the common worship psalter is it's a modern one, and it's my favourite psalter. I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not suffer your foot to stumble. He who watches over you will not sleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, neither the moon by night. The Lord shall keep you from all evil. It is he who shall keep your soul. The Lord shall keep watch over your going out and your coming in, from this time forth and forevermore. So the message of this psalm is very simple. The Lord will protect you. The word here, in my favourite translation, which I'll read later, Robert Alter, used the word guard. Other translations say keep. This is used 6 times between verses 3 and 8, and it concentrates in verses 7 and 8. It just emphasises the protection, the guarding, the keeping that we have. The promises of assurance that we have in verses 3 to 8 are fairly general, not overly specific. But along with the repetition of guard or keep, they provide this litany of assurance to know that we're going to be okay. What it says is this. It says no more or no less than this. It simply says, the Lord will protect you and your soul everywhere and always from every danger. Let's think of that for a moment. The Lord will protect you and your soul everywhere and always from every danger. So I suppose reading this now, thinking about it in May 2020, forced to record in this living room because we can't go into our church buildings because of the pandemic around us, I'm asking the question because I know others are asking it. Does this psalm assure us that trusting in God, we won't catch the coronavirus? We won't die from it? Is that what it's saying? Well, I think we'll probably all agree that Christian believers don't have some kind of a special immunity that others lack. And at the moment, you've probably seen online and elsewhere people have been sharing stories from our Christian history. And there's a quote that's been described and been shared a lot about a plague that devastated the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. And this is how it was described by the leader of the church, the elder or bishop, Dionysius, in Alexandria. He describes it like this. Many of our Christian brothers and sisters showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them like Christ, and with them departed this life serenely happy. For they were infected by others with the disease, drawing on themselves the sickness of their neighbours and cheerfully accepting their pains. Many in their nursing and caring for others transferred their death to themselves and died in their stead. A powerful story of Christian witness in a time of pandemic. Now, the New Testament never promises us physical safety in all circumstances. It urges us to be prepared for suffering that may come our way. And in fact, some parts of the New Testament says that we will come across suffering simply because we are Christians. I think it's absolutely right that we should pray for God's protection from diseases and other physical dangers. It's also right that we should pray for God's protection for others. God wants us to share all such concerns with Him, trusting them to Him. But generally, I think it's important that all of our prayers of this kind carry that implicit thought, if it is your will. The New Testament, however, emphasises the assurance of help and protection afforded in Jesus to those that belong in Him. He is the good shepherd that protects the sheep. In John chapter 10, he says, "No one will snatch them out of my hand." What Jesus is promising is not necessarily physical safety, but spiritual safety. It's this that enabled those Christians in the great plague of the 3rd century to minister to the sick and the dying, going heedlessly of danger. They knew that they had no guarantee of physical safety, but they had that deep assurance that God's love accompanied them in every circumstance. They didn't need to doubt their spiritual safety. And so, like the martyrs of that same period who faced death, they knew that God's love would hold on to them, even beyond death. During the Falklands War, the BBC journalist Brian Hanrahan was reporting on a bombing raid Harriers had taken off from the aircraft carrier that he was embedded on. He wasn't allowed to say how many had taken part, because that may put the forces in danger. But he wanted his listeners to know that every pilot was safe. And so he came up with this phrase that then became famous. He said this: "I'm not allowed to say how many planes joined the raid, but I counted them all out, and I counted them all back again." I counted them all out, and I counted them all back. These words reassured a nation on the other side of the world that their pilots had come home safely. I think of that story when I read this psalm, with the idea of God being protecting and looking after you and guarding you as you go out and as you come back. Your movements, your actions, your very life, you are watched over, you are protected, you are guarded, you are safe, you are home. And not just now, but evermore. Now, interestingly, the psalmist isn't often concerned with the afterlife. He's concerned with suffering and the grave, but apart from a few brief verses like this one, he doesn't really mention the future promise. But our God's protection provides eternal hope. Not just the rest of your life, not just you're coming in and you're going out, but forever. So we do not always presume temporal safety, but we have a promise of spiritual safety. We have the promise of spiritual safety that God makes unconditionally to all that trust in him. Whatever we may have to go through, God is there with us. And in the end, he will bring blessing for us and others out of it. My favourite translation of the Psalms is by Robert Alter. Robert Alter lectures in Hebrew at the University of California. And he just has a way with language. He's more of a linguist than a theologian, but sometimes I find he just brings things out nicely. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help is from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. He does not let your foot stumble. Your God does not slumber. Look, he does not slumber, nor does he sleep, Israel's God. The Lord is your God. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. By day the sun does not strike you, nor the moon by night. The Lord guards you from all harm. He guards your life. The Lord guards your going and your coming, now and forevermore. It's no wonder that this psalm has brought comfort, assurance, and hope to generations of believers who have put their hope in God. And I hope that today, no matter where you find yourself, no matter where you find yourself in life, that you will look to God and you'll discover in him the one who will protect you, the one who will guard you, the one who will keep you safe from all harm. I pray that with his guarding, with his protection, with his keeping, that your foot will not stumble. But the thing about a pilgrimage, and this is a pilgrimage psalm, is that the pilgrimage symbolises our life's journey. So my challenge to you is simple. It's this: keep on the pilgrim way. Don't let the dangers along the way frighten you into submission or make you turn back. Trust in God to bring you to the new Jerusalem. And if you haven't yet started out on your journey, if you haven't yet joined a pilgrimage, what's stopping you? God has promised to guard your footsteps and bring you safely to his home. May the Lord keep you from all evil. May you look to him for your defence. May you lift your hearts to know his help. And may you experience the Lord as ever watchful and ever faithful.